Heyo folks! So in this video I'm going to present my dual pistol Hive Scum build. The centerpiece of this build are obviously dual pistols, and everything else is built around to supplement and enhance them. That doesn't mean that other areas are neglected though. Starting with the weapons, for melee I use the MK4 Devil's Claw with 25% carapace and unyielding damage on it. Now these, the carapace and unyielding, are both something you can rip with something else of your own preference. I could see Flak or Maniac being viable just as well, or even crit chance or versus elite power, or even crit damage. I personally have carapace because it is the most problematic armor type for the build to handle, and having a bit more health with it can go a long way. In addition, crushers, maulers, and bosses are the three most common enemy type I would fight up close and personal, or would use the parry weapon special against. Moving on to the blessings, Shred is an essential part of the build. It enhances both coated weaponry for toxins on crits and helps trigger hypercritical more often. In addition, it also helps dealing with carapace, which each critical is essentially doubles the damage you're dealing. I personally took Savage Sweep for the second blessings, but Rust and Rampage are both valid options here. I prefer Savage Sweep to help dealing with the Horde and supplement the otherwise lowest stat on the weapon, which should be Cleave target. Mobility is maxed out specifically because the blessing can compensate for the minus 20 point in cleave, but there would be no blessings that could help enhance mobility further. The Devil Claw's primary function in this build is to have a defensive option that if you get closed up in melee, you have something to fall back on. Most of your DPS should be in the guns, but if you are not reloaded versus a horde or are being pushed by carapace wave or a boss in tight space, parry can help you out. In addition, the way I set the build up, it is a decent secondary option that you can fall back on reliably and can even deal decent damage to captains. Now speaking of the range, let's go on the main attraction, the guns. Aside from the standard Flak Maniac combination and the mobility being the dump stat, we got Run and Gun and Speed Load. If you play this gun, probably neither are too surprising. Run and Gun has an all-time spread reduction on top of enabling you to sprint and shoot. The former is very much needed for both hip and brace firing these guns. Now Speed Load is here to help maintain the combat ability Desperado, which is not getting confusing at all that there is both a blessing named Desperado and Speed Load and a talent. Speaking of which, there is a talent with similar but slightly, I would consider, better effect honestly, and there is a possible interchangeable setup where you take the Speed Load talent in the build, and here I would replace it with Desperado blessing in that case. Alright, for curios, we are looking at 2 Stamina Curio, quite classic for Hive Scum honestly. A lot of builds have this for extra attack, melee attack speed, and we have 1 Toughness Curio. Combat ability regeneration is a must on Hive Scum in my opinion on all 3. And in addition, I took 2 stamina regen. You can take 1 or 3 depending on your preference, which could be set for the rest. I personally like revive speed a lot, especially since they buffed it, but you can take extra toughness or even more block cost reduction or something else of your own choice like gunner resistance. You can also take only 1 stamina curio and go with 2 toughness with a very similar setup. Okay, moving on to the talent tree. I will make sure to include an image would be considered key components, and I will make sure to include an image for alternative setups, highlighting points that you could drop and what I would recommend taking in their stead then. Now to quickly go over the core of the build. Quick and Deadly, I would say one of those must-have talents. The close damage is useful for both your melee and your ranged guns, since these guns are mostly close range, or if you have Sticky Hand, which I would also consider another must. The amount of spread reduction together with Run and Gun, this will give you enough to have a fairly accurate medium range as well. Being a range build, Voice of Tertium is another must, as well as In Your Face. Now for the Blitz, we have the Boombringer, which is our obvious answer to Carapace problem. Boombringer is more than enough on normal Auric and for most scenario on Havoc, since Hive Scums tend to have priority over grenade pickups, but it more than makes up the shortcomings of the Devil Claw and the guns when it comes to handling crushers or heavy massive maulers. Moving on to the Aura next. Currently the build is using Anarchist. If Pickpocket ever gets nerfed, then Gunslinger Improved might be an option that you can take, but until Pickpocket is in its current state, I would highly recommend taking Anarchist instead, because the extra crit chance helps just as explained under Shred, but also the guns have really nice crit and finesse modifiers overall. For the compatibility, we have Desperado, and I took Pick Your Target with it to help dealing with Carapace and Flak a bit better. Carapace is still not something you want to shoot much, but dealing with Maulers and Armored Ragers, it actually has pretty significant difference in kill times when they are a must. else. And finally, for the keystone, we are using chemical dependency. It's something I don't tend to take with Desperado too often actually, because they're on the opposite side of the tree and also makes the build quite point-starved overall. But it's amazing to have the ability cooldown reduction, since having Desperado up more often is just obviously what you want with this. In addition, chemical dependency can give you extra crit chance, which once again super nice and helps with both the guns and your melee choice. And finally, using stims replenishing 50% toughness and the chemical dependency stacks granting toughness damage reduction is something that can help with Hive Scum squishiness. Now, as for alternatives, as mentioned, you could drop out like a butterfly, and on the guns you can take Desperado then for blessing and pick up Speed Loader. Another place where you could take modifications is the middle of the tree, where depending on your personal preference you can replace Nimble and Spot to Scratch with Slippery Customer or Jittery. I would honestly keep the Aura, but if you want to take something else there, you can like swap around back to Gunslinger improved as mentioned. From the bottom part of the tree, an option that you could drop is Swift Endurance and Hypercritical. In that case, I would also drop Coated Weaponry, and you can just take up Ammo Jack, and from the extra 3 points you could pick up something like Cheap Shot or the better maxed out gems depending on what kind of stims you want to run personally, or one of the defensive talents mentioned before, or even Speed Loader. This would make the build a lot more gun focused, so if you don't really care about your melee choice or you don't need to enhance your melee because let's say you're running the double shields or combat knife and it's already more than good enough, then you can put more range focus in your ability tree. Finally, about the stim lab, I personally prefer Wildfire 1-3 and Fury 1-2 together for the rending and the extra strengths, but Curve 1-4 and Reflect can also be viable. In that case, I would say there is no need for a second Stamina Curio, and you can go with extra toughness instead. If you're confident that you can maintain your stacks, you can even take both. Now, about viability. This build is viable up to Maelstrom on Auric, although you have to be very mindful about the melee only one, with how much carapace can be in that one, but in my experience with rockets, if you pace yourself correctly, you still won't have an issue with it. I haven't tried it on Havoc, and aside from the mentioned recommendations on swapping out in that case the Devil Cloak or Shivs, I also expect that the gun's DPS could be fall a bit too short there, but it remains to be explored. And that is everything I currently got for this build. Let me know how it goes if you decide to give it a try. If you like this, please like and subscribe to appease the machine spirit of YouTube, and as always, thank you for watching.